I'd like to say again, this is certainly a privilege for me to be moderating this session. To be clear, this is not a training session, but you will have an opportunity to learn from experts in the field, people who have a close association with the funding process, funding applications, and the decision-making process. All this in order to enhance your application's success. So also, if you could please save all of your questions for the last 15 or 20 minutes of the session, please, that would be appreciated. We have a lot to go through, so I dare remind you that please keep your questions really short and succinct so we can give as many people a chance to ask as many questions as possible at the end. So I'll ask each of you to introduce yourself, and I'll start with you, Zaka, and move along.
Ke te mihi o kia koutou katoa, ko waio. No imene o ko tipuna, hei kai hui e community Aotearoa ho hei mahi ana, hei kai whakahare aho, ke te noho ki te whanganui atara, ko Sakhir toko inua. Hello, my name is Sakhir. I whakapapa to Yemen. I live in Wellington, and I work for Hui Community Aotearoa in Wellington.
Hi everybody, my name is Gary Watson. I'm the Partnership and Planning Manager at Christchurch City Council, and in my team I have the Community Funding team. If you have questions today that we don't get to answer here, please flag me down after this. And yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to point out before we start is that Christchurch City Council is a part-time funder, so we're not a full-time funder. So my answers, I will be as honest as I can, and I'll be as straightforward as I can, because I believe you want tips. So that's what I'll do. All right, thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Nigel. I was born, raised in Beijing, China, and came to New Zealand when I was 18. That's about 2 years ago. And I've been in banking. I've been in banking and finance for over like 12, 13 years. The reason I'm here, I think, not because of that background, but I've been sitting on sort of various advisory boards in the private sectors and tertiary education providers. But I'm most proud of is my service, 3.5 years service on the ECDF panel. And I think probably I'm still the longest serving panel member to date, because that was only 5 years old, I think, the whole ECDF fund. So that's me, and hopefully I can share some insights with you guys shortly.
Thank you very much. So let's get straight into it. What makes a good funding application? What do you look for? We'll start with you, Nigel.
Oh, wow, okay. Looks like I'm least prepared, because look at my colleagues. I think I'm looking for COCO, C-O-C-O, capability. What's the R? Your objectives. The cost, outcomes. So give us the capability, how you show that as like a self-introduction. Tell us who you are and what you've done before. And objectives, obviously, you should have a sound objective that closely align with the priorities and the funding purpose. And the cost, very important, have a good budget. Knowing my background, money, that's very important. So have a really, really good budget. Show your work, show you've done some homework yourself as well. Not just estimates, but actual quotations you get from where, and itemize the costs that are involved to deliver that project. And the last but not least, the outcomes, something measurable, deliverable, and that actually, if you have that COCO, the COCO, this is something I think a good application should look like.
I feel like I want an acronym, but I don't have one. So I guess for me, when I see an application, I'd like to know that you've looked at the criteria of the fund and been clear on what that is. So what council's criteria is on what particular fund you're applying for. Always like to see collaboration. So I like to hear that there's groups who else you're applying to, but also who you're working with. Outcomes, as we heard before. And probably, and this one's a little controversial, but It goes back to the collaboration. I find it hard to assess, and my staff find it hard to assess when you get multiple applications, especially at times of years when there's festivals. And so, you know, you get 5 applications for Diwali. It's really hard. And no, it is, because and so I guess an initial application is for a project, and if you can tell me who you're working with and have done some work behind the scenes, that's a good place to start.
I realize I didn't give a bit of context, so in terms of where I'm standing in the context here is I'm not a funder, but I work on a daily basis with funders and community groups in bridging that relationship. So in addition to what both of them said, which is great, I think it's Gary talked about the criteria and the alignment with the fund, and that is 2 ways. So there is the funding priorities that fund is trying to support. So it could be ethnic people, Maori, Pacifica, events, but then there's also what they fund. Some funds will support UN capital items, which is purchasing of equipment. Some funds will not do that. So just by having clear priorities that are aligned does not mean that that fund will support you in the specific needs that you have for your project. So it's good to look at both. But as they said, I think clear, precise, short when you can, so bullet points when it comes to the exact outcomes, and clearly defining. I think when we're passionate about something, we get lost about the outcomes, and we just go and talk about them, which is amazing. But it's to realize that we need to really clarify for them what outputs are and what outcomes. So outputs could be running 10 workshops a year in Canterbury for young people around mental health. That's an output. How many young people come through the door? That's a number that you can add. The outcome would be, how did that impact the lives of these young people? What change have you done because of it? So it's clear to define those 2 separately and list them in bullet points. Yeah.
I think when we look at applications, we hardly ever see a bad request. You know, there isn't. We actually want to give you the money. Let's be clear. But we hardly ever see a request for a project or an event or something that's a bad project or a bad event. We see some bad applications. But in terms of the project, and so at some point, you know, the good ones do come to the top because you have to make some choices. So, you know, it's important to know that everybody would love, we want to fund you. We just need to be able to see within the lines what the project is. Yeah. Okay.
Gary, you mentioned the word collaboration. I'm assuming that if you're a potential funder, it is your responsibility, so to speak, for want of another word, to find out other organizations in your region who have similar objectives so that you can partner with them. So there's almost a proactive element to collaboration.
Yes, and also I think we will often go back to people and say to you, you know, we've got your application. Are you aware that we've got 3 others that look the same? And are you aware of these? Now, sometimes people are aware, and sometimes people aren't. And it's actually the best thing that we could say to you is maybe get together, because you're all carrying those overhead costs. If you're doing 4 events, there's 4 overheads. If there's some way of working together, suddenly there's 1 overhead, and there's a lot more fun. You know what I mean? Yeah, and we as funders, more and more now, we are collaborating with other funders. So I will go to Rata and say to Rata, hey, are you aware that we've got this application? Do you have one? If we were to fund at this rate, would you fund at the same thing? So we're really we try behind the scenes off what we get on a bit of paper to do a bit of work for you, and then be able to say, hey, we've spoken to Rata, they might be interested, have a talk to them. So yeah. Collaboration both ways.
Thank you, Gary. Next question for the panel. What tips do you have for new applicants or people who are struggling to access funding? So we'll start with you this time, Zaka.
I'd say identify a person within your group with strong writing skills. If you can't and you're a small charity, come to us, Huie, we provide a free service. But also have a list of what projects you have, what each project has in terms of outcomes, outputs, who is it helping, how many people are you helping, and create budgets separately. That doesn't mean that you have to apply for each project individually, but it helps you separate them, which can diversify your income depending on what RATA funds, what the City Council funds, so you don't just have to have one application, get one funding, and have to let go of 3 projects just because that does not align with that funder. So create separate kind of like project plans for each project, as detailed as you can. And the collaboration thing is very important. But I also know that, especially I think with ethnic communities, sometimes there is a group with a lot of sensitivities and all of it. So if there is no room for collaboration, don't leave it at that. Explain why you can't, so that the funder understands why they have different events that are happening at the same time for the same cause. Yeah.
I think if you're a first timer, what you should do is go out there, have a look what's out there. Is there something you could be part of? Is there someone you can work with? Back to the collaboration point. And also think outside the box. It's not all about events and cultural celebrations, which are important, but also is there any way we could utilize some new forms of social media or online-based trainings to enable or improve the excuse me, capability and ability of our community members and the leaders as well?
I guess for us, the biggest tip I can give you is Tyler Harrison-Hunt, who was here this morning, one of the councillors. If you're new, go find a councillor, because they make the decisions in my house. They make the decisions. My staff make recommendations, but those are the guys that make the decisions. Also, if you are new or if you are struggling, we have staff, our funding advisors work in my funding team doing the admin of it. Our community development advisors, those are the people you want to ring up. Just pick up the phone, ring them. If you have a look on the council website, you'll see them all. They will talk you through what you're thinking about. They will give you some options. They'll be able to tell you some of that collaboration stuff. But this sounds a weird line, but if we haven't met you, you're gonna struggle, to be honest, because we know so many groups, and we have experience with so many groups. If you're new, get yourself known, whether that's with us or the politicians or whatever. Just pick up the phone. We've got staff happy to come and have a yarn. Keen to hear from new groups. Very clean. But that's what I'd say. Put your hand up, say hi.
If I can add to that too, is I think as ethnic communities here, you pretty much meet the priority alignment of every fund in the country. So when you meet with these advisors and you ask them for advice on the application process, on the project, and they say, no, we can't fund that, don't stop there. Be like, okay, how can we work around this project so that it meets your funding criteria or priorities? Because we are actually supporting a community. Because a lot of you, I know, would probably come into this space already engaging with your communities, already having programs. So it's not like you're thinking about an idea. It's about how can we help facilitate your lives and make it easier. And that's the funding advisor's job, is to assist you in becoming a successful applicant. So that first email, if it's a no, don't let it put you off, because I know there's a lot of pride in a lot of these communities where you don't want to ask. But this is a lot of the money that is supposed to go back to the community. So you're not asking for charity. You're asking for taxpayer money most of the time. It's a lot of that community recycled money that needs to go back.
Yeah, and I think also too, don't be defeated if you didn't get approved the first time around. Back to the ECDF funding, I think there used to be an annual thing, so once a year. Now I think it's at least 2 monthly, quarterly thing. So you have a chance. So if this quarter you didn't get through, and definitely ask for feedback and make some changes and reapply the next quarter. I'm sure MEC staff would love to help you guys.
Thank you. You've said pick up the phone, make contact, meet with funders or funding advisors. That's shorthand for having a relationship with them. Would that be true?
Yeah, absolutely. And as funders, we have to make space for that. We have to make time for that. And I'll say this now: if you contact one of our staff and you don't get the time, then contact me, and I will find you the time. Because we, I think years ago, funding was a transaction from our viewpoint. It was, you give me a bit of paper, I'll have a look at it, I'll give it back to you. Now I expect from my staff that we get an application and we have a discussion and there's a phone call and there's, hey, maybe tweak this bit, or we're not. When you hear from a funder that we're not able to fund this bit, it's not because the project's bad, it's just because we can't fund that bit. The next sentence hopefully is, however, let's have a talk about this bit. And for me at the moment, events and festivals are great, but if you have capacity building or something within your organisation that's building long-term capability, then that's probably more of an attraction. And so I would say that to someone, look, yes, you want $3,000 for a one-day event, but I could give you $3,000 for some capacity building that will help you build. So next year you're not looking for $3,000 for a festival, you've built that. So those conversations, but yep, relationships are really important.
I'm just very happy. This is the first time we meet, other than like a very brief Zoom that I was late to. But this is what we encourage in the sector. So yeah, thank you. I think relationships are important. What we do at Huye when we work with community groups is we create also that link. So if you haven't met the advisor yet, we will make the introduction and we try and stay there for at least the first 6 months or 3 months, because we understand that there sometimes might be communication issues or just lack of understanding, and the power dynamic could come at play. And that's where we come to really balance these relationships, which sometimes we do need to have, but we usually have funders. And in Wellington, we can make the case for the Wellington Community Fund, who have been incredible and very advanced, and they weren't there 5 years ago. But these are the funders that I can immediately let go of the community group, knowing that they're in safe hands, whereas some funds, we have to hold these relationships until you are feeling familiar. So if you're going, take a support person, go as a group. You don't have to be there alone, because that could also be intimidating at times.
Any other comments?
I think you guys are welcomed when most of the government funds, I understand, is they have someone dedicated to look after the fund itself. And then you're more than welcome to, by default, by job mandate, their job mandate is to explain any question you have about this particular funding project. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact them, ask questions, and get all the obstacles out of the way. And then before you even start working on the application. So stand up and make your voice heard. I think it's very important.
And I think it's fair to say that some of these funds are confusing to you guys, and some of them are confusing to us too, internally. You know, we spend a bit of time juggling on, oh, does it fit there, does it fit there, does it fit there? So that's something that I think funders always look at. We want the best service for the customer, and sometimes it doesn't look like that, but we are trying our hardest. But they are confusing sometimes. So yeah, pick up the phone if you need clarification.
Good. I think you couldn't be clear enough. Pick up the phone.
Yep.
Cool. So can you please explain how important is good governance when you are deciding whether to award funding or not? Not necessarily only for more established organizations, but also for up-and-coming organizations who may be keen to get the money but don't have good governance. So we'll start with you, Nigel, on this one.
I think probably Garrett's the best person to talk to, but I personally, when I look at the application, I know some of the funds, if you do not have a good governance in place, we cannot release the funds. So it's for some funds, I think, well, probably if not most of them, of all of them, it's a must. But I think also have a really good sound structure in place. It's not only benefit the application by itself, but also the long-term growth potentials of your organization as well. So it is crucial to have a good governance in place. And back to the Coco acronym I talked about, the capability part. Good governance actually give the founder a confidence that you have the capability to deliver. So that's from my point of view, the first C is very important, and good governance actually help you to get a tick on the first C.
You go? Oh, okay, maybe I'll go because I might say something controversial and then you can correct me.
Get into it.
I think if you are a charity, and this is advice we'd also give funders, if you're a charity that's been functioning for 3 to 5 years with consistent funding streams, so you've been applying for funds and getting them, then I'd say good governance is essential. And if you don't have it, then if funding gets cut, 100% in a good decision that was made. But for new charities or charities that have been registered but haven't had any source of funding, and this is the first time they get funding, I don't think good governance should be determining the outcomes of the funding application, but it should be encouraged. So when a funder will give you the money, then they should tell you that to get money in the next year, you will need to show a track record of what you've done with it. How have you spent it? Because even though not all of them actually do practice sustainable practices, it's good for us to know that we're not wasting money. As a charity or as a community group, if there are ways that you can spend that money more efficiently or better, it's good for all of us, and it's not necessarily just to make the funder's life easier. So yeah, I'm not going to agree.
I think he's stolen my notes because I'm going to read directly what I wrote. Organisational governance is important, but doesn't need to be rigid like a big corporation. So I would actually 100% agree there. So if you have a history, then we expect excellent governance, really. If you are new, I guess it's the capability stuff. I guess that's what, I said before. If you are new, it certainly shouldn't stop you applying. But we would say to you that, next time when you come back, we need to see this, we need to see this, we need to see this. An example, just the other day, we had an application from a group who the secretary and the treasurer turned out to be the same person and also was a board member. So all of a sudden that just does not feel right. But then a conversation and suddenly it was, okay, we'll resubmit this in a month's time and we'll go away and work on that. And that's the stuff we want to be able to do. So it is really important because there's accountability to all of this. And for me, at council, it's ratepayers' money, taxpayers' money. And you guys think your groups are wonderful. I can tell you that there'll be people out there that think their group's even better. And so accountability is really important. So we just need to keep those lines clean and make sure that we're all, above board. But in terms of expectations for someone new, we're all learning. And we will look at funding and have that discussion and see where we can get to. But in time, it's very important. If we know you, we expect you. We expect you to have it.
Yeah, thank you. Often it has been said that new applicants are actually good people wanting to do good things,
Yep.
and yet they have to tick certain boxes which they probably don't know about. So,
Yep.
yeah. Cool. The next question is somewhat different. It is, what can government or other philanthropic funders do differently to make funds more accessible to groups? In other words, are there any alternate funding models that we ought to be considering? And we'll start with you, Zaka.
Thank you. And I'll start this by asking you a few questions. So how many of you are aware of the Charities Amendment Bill that's about to pass? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Have you made submissions? Have you had the chance? Capacity, resources? Yeah, 1? Okay. So this is a room full of people who will 100% be impacted by an amendment that's passing on the 9th of December, which after it was extended for a month. So the first thing is be loud, because there are a lot of changes that we need to see in application processes. And I am in a very positive way, surprised and a good way by the changes that are at least acknowledged and you're wanting to do in Christchurch. But the more you speak about them, the more they will change. And why I say speak about them is because we come with a perception that we don't know how to function in this system that is correct. And the reality is the system we're having to work with is very outdated, has a wrong definition of what charity is or what social services are, because non-for-profit work is different from the outdated model of charity. And we know that, but we feel like this is our duty to deliver. Most of you and most of the NGO sector delivers essential services that without them, government would collapse, literally. Like that's 3 or 5% of the GDP of New Zealand is from the non-for-profit sector. So why are you still having to navigate a system that treats you as people who are asking for donations and charity rather than businesses or social service providers? So that's something that you need to be aware of. What we're advocating for is systems change, so accessible applications. Some of the funders we work with now accept applications that are done by video recordings. So if you're not skilled at writing, English is not your first language, you record yourself, what you do, what you need the money for, and then they will schedule a meeting and they will build on that application with you. So that's access. We're working on untagged funding. So also some of the funders we work with will see your accountability report, they will see your project, they will see that you're financially responsible, they will give you the money you're asking for or how much they can afford without telling you where to spend it on. So salaries or operational costs or like items. You're free to use it, which then encourages you to be more sustainable, more creative, more innovative, and allows you to grow. And 3 is the collaborative approach, which we're also seeing a lot of change in it, whereas if you're applying to the Christchurch City Council and they can't fund you for the full amount, they don't just give you half and leave you be, but they connect you to other funders that they're in constant conversations with because they have the capacity and resources, and they advocate for you to actually gain that funding. So it's not just one application at a time where you get to spend hours of reviews and feedback, but you can actually submit a universal application that works for all funders within your region, and then you're able to save a lot of time and energy and all of that. And I'll stop here.
Comments from the other 2 gentlemen, please.
Right, I think I wish the funding process can be more interactive. That is not a one-way thing. Traditionally, it's just an invitation for you to submit application. You put everything together, send it through, and good luck. 2 months, 3 months later, yes or no. I think during that process, there got to be something the funders can do to make it more interactive. I'm just thinking, like, I would really like to, my finance background, like the pre-approval, like approval of your home loans. Do we have a quick online tool, self-assessment tool that we could use? Ask 10 questions or 5 questions, if better. And then you can get an indication of, yes, this is the right funding for you, go ahead. Spend your time, effort, resources to put a full application together. But if it's a no, you don't have to waste your time, or have a chat with the founder, and then decide what's your next move are. And also if it's a one-stop shop for the community members to come to. I mean, there are so many different funding partners, resources out there, but do you know all of them? Probably not. So when you talk to someone can tell you, hey, look, this project may be funded, or most likely to be funded by this particular fund, and then go for it. So you're not wasting your time, energy, and like Hui, it's probably the best team to talk to because they know all of them, and I'm not their agent again, but I think it's really good to have an organization like Hui and people like Saka there to help people out.
Thank you.
These guys have given me some things to think about. So I'm not going to make excuses for being in local government, but it has some restraints, and those that fund with us will understand that, or will know that, maybe not understand that, but will know it. After March 15, I think there's 2 things that I think we learned and we did, and we're probably not going to continue with, which is a real shame. So the first thing we did was the day after that event, central government and local government got together and sat in a room and said, righto, we have a community here that's been deeply hit. How do we all sit around the table? How do we all work together? And how do we look after this? And we did it. We, within days, we had a fund together. We all sat in a room and we had MSD, we had immigration, we had everyone. I do struggle to understand why we don't still have something like that, because I think it worked really well. It was really customer friendly. It was, someone could walk in and it was a one-stop shop, not just about funding, but, projects are holistic and they're everything. And the second thing we did was, in those who have applied, I always forget the name of this fund. I'm calling it the Partnership Fund, but the Activation Fund. Thank you. And so that's a one-page application that comes in quickly and gets dealt with by 3 staff members, one from each of the organisations. Now, it's for smaller amounts of money, and I think that's some of the key, because I know how long it takes you guys to do an application for 50,000 or 5,000. Doesn't make too much difference, it's still a long time. I can tell you in our organisation, it costs a lot to process a $500 grant is sort of the same as a $50,000 grant. So the whole thing doesn't really add up. So that's some of the stuff that I would like to see changed, is applications easier. Working in a political environment, I'd love to see decisions made easier, but at the moment, I don't think there's any of my councillors in here. I think sometimes they like to be Father Christmas, and they like to be the one who says, I've made the decision that you're going to get this money. And I don't want to be Father Christmas as a staff member, but what I would like to do is to be able to turn my applications over quicker. And I'd also like to be able to say, I've had the relationship with Janeth, we've talked, we've had the relationship, but I have to somehow translate that conversation to someone who hasn't had it to make the decision. And so I think decision making for some of us is something I'd really like to change. I like the idea about the video request. It's not going to happen next week, but he's planted a seed that makes sense to me. I just need to go away and see how we work that. But yeah.
No, and to build on both points, I think the one-way street, I think it needs to be interactive. And I have a story from a funder who had one funding advisor, and I was just introducing myself to understand more about the fund and who we can advise to go there. And the first thing she said to me was, it's just me. I currently meet with every funding requester in person or on Zoom, and I have to analyze that myself. We're going to have to make it a mainstream process, and that's what people are telling me. And the first reaction I had was, please don't. Even if you meet 5 groups a day or 10 a week, this is the interaction we want. The minute it just becomes an automated process where it's just yes, no, barely get any feedback, it just destroys that human link, and you don't really get to see what the application is not telling you. And in terms of the decision making, I think, yes, sometimes it's slow, but we've seen multiple times that if we really just put our foot down all together, things will change tomorrow. And I was working with government organization around the fund, emergency fund, and they asked groups to come together, plan events, and everything was working smoothly. And then they said, okay, the fund, which they asked us to actually do, is going to come in 16 weeks. And with the help of the advisors too, I had kind of a conversation to say, this is unacceptable, we cannot go with it because of certain, and I can't say because I know, tell you who, but we've all came together, we've all made the decision that this fund needs to be administered now or this project is not going to go ahead. And it was administered now. So it's about really just coming together, and that's why I asked the question about the Charities Amendment Bill. And I understand that it's a privilege to be able to participate in these things because you all have jobs, you all have sometimes part-time jobs, kids, family. So when you have the time, try and take part of these conversations because they will affect you eventually. And that's what we try and at least do on your behalf, but we can't reach out to everyone all the time.
Thank you. So we're moving on to questions and answers, please. So I've got a few of my colleagues who will walk around with mics. And can you please hold the mic up to your mouth? so everyone can hear it, and keep your questions as succinct as possible. This lady right at the front here, Mark.
So, thank you. My name is Janet. As you might know, I have a lot of work done with the communities, and I don't have a sugar daddy, and usually I fund things myself. Now, I'm an individual, and I don't have charity or trust. And when I work with trust, sometimes I have to do what the trust says rather than the work. Now, the work that I do impact a lot of people. What have you can offer to individuals like me that don't have this organization to actually get good amount of money to do the work that I already been doing during a few years?
So there are options, like it's not of what I can give you, but how you set up. So there in New Zealand, you're either a charity, a business, or incorporated society, and you can add that non-for-profit clause, and that's how you can get significant amounts of money, which means usually more than $10,000, depending on the fund, some of them 15. But you can also register as under an umbrella organization, so another charity can host your money for you, which gives you that legal status so you can apply for more than $10,000. But there are also two new options that have arrived in New Zealand about a year ago. One is called the Open Collective, and one is called the Gift Collective. They're the same company, they just function differently depending on what you want to set up as. If you want to set up as a business, it will be Open Collective. If you want to set up as a charity, it's called the Gift Collective. They take 8%. A lot of the funders we work with acknowledge that cost and they pay it as part of the grant. But what it means is all of your transactions now are online. You have an online page for free, and every penny you spend gets deducted from there. So you never have the money yourself, but you can use it and facilitate it, which to a lot of funders, that's the accountability they ask for. But here's the catch. Not all funders accept it yet. So we're trying to advocate for it. It's a new thing, but more of them are coming on board with it. So that's kind of like what I can give you from a structural point of view of advice.
Okay, if there's no other comments from the other two gentlemen, we move on to the next question. No?
I think she's looking at me. Can I just quickly say?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So we don't fund individuals. So basically what he said is true though. Umbrella-wise, that for me would be probably your easiest and your quickest way. But certainly, yeah, at the moment we don't fund individuals.
Thank you, Gary. I saw a gentleman with the red collar shirt up there. Saba?
Yeah, my name is Hayford. I'm from Nigerian Canterbury Association. I have a question or a comment that's come out with about two questions in one. Supposing you are making your application for funding and set out your objectives, and at the end of the day, the application is granted, and you find out that you've not really covered a lot of ground. You needed some things to make it colorful. Is it allowed to extend so long as it can be contained within the budget? That's one aspect. And the other question is, I think, Saka, you made mention of it, that some funding, you don't have to pay salaries or things like that. Now, the planning and implementation of the projects cost time and money on the individuals that are governing, I mean, the governing the organization. Is it allowed to pay for transportation, pay for entertainment for the people running the organization? Thank you.
Okay, so for us, we at the moment we ask people to specify. You've got two questions. So I think your first one, if I've got this right, is that you've made an application, you've been given a lump of money, and your project suddenly you've got other things that you want to do. So your request is, can you? So for us, that's a phone call. So what I would say to you is, no, you can't do it without having a phone call. We're very unlikely to say no unless you're deciding you're going to go buy a Lamborghini with it or something, and not take your kids on a school camp. No. The second one, Remind me what the second question was, sorry.
Around what can you spend the money on or
Oh, yes, sorry.
transportation?
Yeah. So if an application clearly says that that's what it's for, then absolutely. The salaries is an interesting one. So we sort of do, we do a little bit of a quiz here. So volunteer recognition, we pay. So if you have something that is going out to service people in the community and you have people driving to, I don't know, to help old people or to do whatever, then we would pay that, but it would come out as a volunteer contribution. It wouldn't come as a salary. If you wanted a salary, then we need to see a job description. It's a little bit archaic, but we need to do that for obvious reasons. But what you put in your application, we would always come back and say, at the moment, and I know we've talked about what we would call high trust funding, of saying, here's the money, spend it on what you like. We haven't quite got there, but we would come back and say, so of the $5,000 we've given you, the $3,000 for salary, the $2,000 for, I don't know, entertainment, that's what our $5,000 for. So we do split it, but we are getting more and more to this high trust funding of saying, what does it cost to run? It spends too much time breaking it up. As long as you deliver, here it is. And that's where we'd like to get you. We're not there, but we're close.
But it also depends on the fund. Some
Yep.
funds
Yep.
will give you the money for transport, for salaries.
Yep.
So it depends on who you applied for and who you got the money from. Yeah.
And I think question number one shows how important to have a real good budget at the start,
Yeah.
so you not go over the budget. And also, if you do that too often, I think the funder will question the ability to deliver as well. And back to the second question, speaking of the ECDF funding, we have a lot of arguments on the panel about this. So we've made a call at the time as, is it a project-specific expenses or is it a BAU expense for you? Even salaries. We cover salaries if the person you hired, particularly just for this particular project, to help to deliver it, plan it, if transportation involved as well, if it's part of the project. But if it's something to do with your daily expenses, your BAU stuff, your admins and things, probably no. So if you can specify how, or demonstrate how this is part of the project, and then most likely, at least for ECDF, and they would consider it.
Yeah, can I just say ECDF stands for the Ethnic Communities Development Fund, and it's run by the Ministry for Ethnic Communities. Now, we've got time for half a question, but allow one. So this lovely lady out the front and a quick response from the panel will be appreciated. Thank you.
Kia ora, my name is Rodora. I work for Birthright. We work with single-parent families, and we work with ethnic families there. My question is about, I heard a lot about collaboration this afternoon and throughout the day. But for a organization to run, we need to build up the trust of the funders, of the community that we work with, and that equates to money and time. And at the same time, when we look at funding applications, it asks about how do you know this is a need? So it also asks about engagement with our communities. How would that look like in putting our funding? Can we put something about community capability, collaboration, trust building there, or panaw nga tanga, as we say?
I think you should, like if you can, and we always recommend that community groups, when they demonstrate how you demonstrated success, get quotes, get feedback from the community groups about what they say, because that's really important. But it's also not to say that because you have that high trust, you're going to get funding, and if you don't, you won't. It's about how you frame it. I know some tier 1 organizations with millions of dollars who are not really serving their members how they should be, but they know how to write an application, they know who to talk to, they get the money. So because you're doing something right or wrong does not mean you're going to get the money. I think it's the essential problem is it's about framing the application and making it look good. And that's where we encourage relationships. Because when there is a relationship, they actually know if you're doing well or not.
But when you do the budget, you can't really just put, okay, collaboration building
Yes.
X, Y, and Z, $100, $200, but where in the whole picture,
Okay.
there is the
We got funding from the ECDF very recently, and it was about collaboration. So how we framed it was that we're going to go around the country as Huye with the capacity building, twice a year to Dunedin, Christchurch, Auckland, and Wellington. And the purpose of that is to work with ethnic communities around grant writing and accessing funding, but the main purpose too is for them to get to know each other and collaborate. So we framed it as objectives. What are the objectives? We said we're going to train ethnic communities on funding applications, we're going to get them together, allow whakawhanaungatanga, and this, and we added the cost.
Thank you, Zach. Sorry.
Sorry, just quickly. I think back to the budget. You know, budget is my thing. I think to reach collaboration and think this is the things you want to do. But and most importantly is when you do that, what actions are going to take. So the actions cost money, right? Hiring a venue, put a food on the table. All this stuff should be part of the budget. So that's the breakdown, itemize the budget. I think most of our founders are looking for.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap it up now because we've got a very tight schedule. So I want to thank Nigel, Gary, and Zaka on all of our behalves. Thank you. You've done a great job. I hope you've got something out of it. And please scurry on down for the next session in the plenary room. Thank you.